Welcome to the Faith and Feelings podcast. My name is Taylor Joy, and I'm passionate about helping you untangle and honor your emotions, authentically practice your faith, and integrate both into your everyday life so that you can experience the goodness and delight that comes from living in relationship with yourself, God, and others. Thank you for joining me. Let's get started. I wonder if you, like me, have a complicated relationship with the word vulnerability. I notice that when I hear that word, something in me both leans in and pulls back at the same time. There's a part of me that wants to embrace and live into it, and another part of me that feels a little guarded just hearing it. For every single one of us, vulnerability has told a story in our lives, not always directly, but through our experiences, through the moments we've shared something vulnerable and how those moments have been received. For me, vulnerability has carried different textures at different times. Sometimes it's felt like connection, like being seen and understood and met. Sometimes it's felt like exposure, like being misunderstood and missed. And these narratives matter. Because when we think about bringing vulnerability into our friendships, we're not just deciding whether or not to share something. We don't come into vulnerability empty-handed. We bring all the stories of what it's cost us before. So when we say we want deeper connection, part of what we're really wanting is a different ending to those stories. But that asks something of us, not just to be vulnerable, but to stay present to ourselves in a new way as we are. Recently, I've been thinking about vulnerability not just as something we do, but as something we learn how to do. Because for many of us, the challenge isn't that we don't want to share our inner world. It's that we don't always have the language for it. And that gap between what we feel and what we can name is where a lot of our relational tension actually lives. I hear this a lot. I don't have words. And I don't think that's a small thing. I think this is really deeply human. We all carry an inner world, a rich, complex web of thoughts, feelings, experiences, beliefs, and questions that shapes who we are and becomes the foundation for meaningful and intimate friendships. But expressing that inner world, finding the words, and learning how to share it takes time, patience, and practice. And so when we talk about mutual vulnerability, we're not just talking about openness. We're talking about capacity. The capacity to stay connected to yourself while being connected to another person. The capacity to notice your internal experience and not lose it in the presence of someone else. And that idea, holding on to yourself in relationship, is something I keep coming back to. Because it's easy to think of vulnerability as giving yourself away to someone else. But in reality, the kind of vulnerability that actually builds connection is the kind where you remain anchored in yourself while you're sharing. Where you're not abandoning your inner world to make the other person comfortable. And when you're not disappearing in the process of relating. A few years ago, I came across a framework from the Crucible Institute called the 4 Points of Balance, which helps explain what needs to be in place internally for us to have that capacity for vulnerability. And not just vulnerability as a moment, but vulnerability as a way of relating, a way of being with yourself while also being in relationship with someone else. And the more I sit with it, the more I realize how much this framework speaks to the tension underneath so many of our interactions. How do I share something real without losing myself in the process? How do I let someone in without handing over my sense of self? And so today, I'd like to describe their 4 points of balance as a way to increase our language and understanding of vulnerability. The first point is what they call a solid, flexible self. And I think the phrasing alone is important because it holds together two things we often separate. A solid self is rooted. It has a sense of identity, of internal truth, of what is real for you. And a flexible self is open, responsive, and able to remain in connection without becoming rigid or shutting down. And when you think about vulnerability, this becomes really significant because vulnerability has a way of testing both of those things at once. When you share something meaningful, you're not just expressing information. You're revealing something about your internal world. And in that moment, it's really easy to start shifting your attention outward, to look for cues and track the other person's response, and to wonder, did that land? Did I say too much? Did they understand me? And without even realizing it, your sense of self can actually start to move away from your own internal experience and towards their reaction to it. But a solid, flexible self would allow you to stay rooted in your own experience, even while you remain open to connection. For example, you might say, that actually hurt me. And instead of second guessing yourself or softening it right away, you stay connected to that truth, even as you stay open to hearing their response. And that doesn't mean you don't care about the other person. It means you don't abandon yourself in order to maintain connection. And I think that distinction is one of the most important parts of mutual vulnerability, because mutual vulnerability isn't just about how much we share with each other, but about whether each person is able to remain themselves while they're sharing. The second point is quiet mind and calm heart. And this speaks to the internal experience of vulnerability, the part that we don't always pay attention to, but that has a huge impact on how we show up. Because when we open up, something in us activates. Our mind becomes more alert. Our awareness sharpens. We become more conscious of ourselves, of how we're being perceived, and of how the moment is unfolding. And if we're not careful, we start to follow those internal movements instead of staying present with the actual interaction. We start analyzing what we just said, replaying it, interpreting the other person's reaction, trying to make sense of the moment while it's still happening. And in doing that, we actually leave the experience itself and move into a kind of internal commentary about the experience. But a quiet mind and calm heart doesn't mean the absence of thoughts or emotions. It means the ability to notice them without being pulled into them, to recognize there's something happening inside of me right now, without immediately reacting to it or trying to fix it. For example, you might feel the urge to clarify, explain, or get it right, but instead of tightening up, you allow yourself to stay with what you've already said without overcorrecting it. And that kind of internal quietness allows you to remain present in the moment, because vulnerability requires presence. And without a quiet mind and calm heart, it becomes very difficult to stay with the experience of connection without either over-managing it or withdrawing from it. The third point is grounded responding. And this is where vulnerability becomes something relational, something that exists between two people in real time. Because vulnerability doesn't just happen in the act of sharing. It also happens in the way we respond to each other. When someone responds to what you've shared, something in you responds back. In that moment, the moment between sharing and responding, is where a lot of relational dynamics actually unfold. Sometimes the response feels aligned. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you feel seen. And sometimes you feel misunderstood or left in a place that feels incomplete. And in these moments, there's often an internal impulse to do something with that experience. You might want to clarify, to explain more, to bring the other person closer to your perspective. Or you might feel the urge to pull away, to protect yourself, and to close off to what you just opened. But grounded responding is something different. It's the ability to stay connected to yourself and stay in connection with the other person. It's not reactive, and it's not controlled in a way that tries to manage the outcome. It's rooted. For example, maybe you share something personal and the other person doesn't respond in the way you expected. Instead of jumping in to clarify or defend yourself, you stay present, letting the moment breathe and allowing space for their response to unfold. And that rootedness allows you to remain in the interaction without needing to fix it immediately or escape from it. It allows space for the moment to exist as it is, even when it's imperfect. And that's where a mutual vulnerability starts to take shape, not in perfectly aligned exchanges, but in the ability of both people to stay present in the face of imperfection. And that's where a meaningful endurance, the fourth point, becomes important. Because learning how to share your inner world and learning how to stay connected to yourself in relationship isn't something that happens instantly. It's something that develops over time. And it requires staying with yourself even when it feels uncomfortable. It requires staying in conversations even when you don't fully have the words. And it requires allowing yourself to be in process again and again. For example, you might start a conversation by saying, I don't fully have the words for this yet. And instead of seeing that as a failure, you trust that your ability to articulate, to express, and to share will deepen as you continue to engage your inner world. And that kind of endurance isn't about pushing through or forcing yourself to be something you're not. It's about staying present with your own becoming. And when we bring all of this together, mutual vulnerability starts to look less like two people perfectly opening up to each other, and more like two people learning how to be in their own experience while staying in relationship together. It's less about raw exposure or emotional intensity, and more about a kind of internal and relational balance. A solid, flexible self that allows you to remain rooted in who you are. A quiet mind and calm heart that allows you to stay present in the moment. Grounded responding that allows you to stay connected in relationship. And meaningful endurance that allows you to stay in the experience long enough for it to matter. And maybe as we're sitting with all of this, the question becomes, what does this actually look like in real life? Because it's one thing to understand the 4 points of balance conceptually, but it's another thing to practice them in the middle of a real conversation, in a real relationship, when emotions are active and things feel uncertain. So I want to end by grounding this in something practical. How do we begin to practice these 4 points of balance in small, intentional ways? The first place I would start is with the idea of a solid and flexible self. And practically, that might look like this. The next time you share something vulnerable, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what is true for me right now? Not what is the right thing to say, not what will be received best, but what is actually true in your inner world. And then as you share, see if you can stay anchored in that truth, even if the response you receive isn't perfect. You might even notice the impulse to adjust yourself based on the other person's reaction. And instead of following that impulse, you can gently return to yourself and say, this is still what's true for me. The practice isn't about being unresponsive. It's about not losing yourself in the process of connecting. And then, with a quiet mind and calm heart, one of the most practical things you can do is simply begin to notice what's happening inside of you without immediately acting on it. So in a moment of vulnerability, whether you're sharing something or receiving something, try to notice, what am I thinking right now? What am I feeling right now? And instead of following every thought or reaction, see if you can just stay aware of it. Almost like you're creating a little space between the experience and your response. You might say to yourself, I'm feeling something right now, and I don't have to resolve it immediately. That alone can change the way you show up in a conversation, because it allows you to stay present instead of getting pulled into internal analysis or emotional reactivity. With grounded responding, a really practical way to practice this is to slow down your responses in conversation. When someone shares something with you, instead of immediately responding, take a breath. Let the moment sit for just a second longer than you normally would. And in that pause, ask yourself, can I stay connected to myself while I respond to them? That might look like responding honestly without over-explaining, or asking a grounded question instead of trying to fix the moment, or simply acknowledging what you heard without rushing to move past it. Grounded responding is less about saying the right thing and more about staying present in a way that keeps you connected to both yourself and the other person. And finally, meaningful endurance. This might be the hardest one to practice because it asks you to stay present in moments that feel unresolved. So one practical way to work with this is to resist the urge to rush out of discomfort. If there's a moment of silence, let it exist. If something feels a little incomplete, let it remain incomplete for a moment longer than you're used to. You might notice a pull to say more, to clarify, or to move on. And instead of following that impulse right away, gently stay with the moment and remind yourself, I don't have to resolve this immediately. Part of vulnerability is learning how to stay in the space between what is said and how it's received. And that space is where a lot of real connection actually forms. What becomes clear when you start practicing these 4 points is that vulnerability isn't just about being open. It's about being present. It's about being able to stay connected to yourself while also staying connected to someone else. And that kind of presence doesn't happen all at once. It's something you build over time through small moments of awareness and small moments of choosing to stay instead of pulling away. So maybe the invitation is just to begin noticing. Can I stay with myself in this moment? Can I remain present even if it feels a little uncomfortable? Can I share honestly without losing my center? Because the more you practice that, the more vulnerability stops feeling like something that risks your stability and starts to feel like something that deepens it. And maybe that's the work underneath all of this. Not just being known, but learning to remain yourself while you are. I'm so grateful that you listened to today's episode. Thank you for spending time with me. I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on Instagram at TaylorJoy or through my website, taylorjoymurray.co. Also, if you enjoyed this conversation, it would mean so much to me if you took a minute to subscribe and review the podcast. This is an easy way to partner with me and is invaluable in reaching new listeners. Until next week.